America and other free and open societies face crucial challenges and opportunities abroad that affect security and prosperity at home. This is a series of conversations with guests who bring deep understanding of today's battlegrounds and creative ideas about how to compete, overcome challenges, capitalize on opportunities, and secure a better future. I am H.R. McMaster. This is Battlegrounds.
On today's episode of Battlegrounds, our focus is on Ukraine, a U.S. security partner in Eastern Europe. Our guest is Prime Minister Oleksiy Honcharuk, who served as Prime Minister of Ukraine from August 2019 to March 2020. He was Ukraine's youngest-serving Prime Minister. Prime Minister Honcharuk initiated crucial reforms in Ukrainian markets, instated new anti-corruption operations, and launched investment in climate improvement measures. Prior to his government service, Prime Minister Honcharuk practiced law and started a non-governmental organization to assist investors adversely affected by corruption. From 2015 to 2019, Prime Minister Honcharuk headed an NGO aiming to digitize Ukraine, support businesses, and improve bureaucratic efficiency. He also served as deputy head of the Presidential Office of Ukraine and was a member of the National Reforms Council under the President of Ukraine. Prime Minister Honcharuk is currently a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council and visiting fellow at Stanford's Freeman Spogli Institute. From the 9th through the 18th centuries, the Kievan Rus, Mongols, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Crimean Tatars, Cossacks, and eventually Russians controlled the territory that is now Ukraine. In the late 1700s, the Russian Empire annexed western Ukraine and the Crimean Kongate along the Black Sea, transforming them into Russian provinces. Ukrainian society was Russified, as the Ukrainian elite entered Russian nobility through marriage, governmental position, and education. In the 1800s, however, academia and other influences reawakened Ukrainian cultural identity. As with the Baltic states, the 1905 Russian Revolution weakened Russian influence and allowed the resurgence of a Ukrainian national identity. Post-World War I Ukraine declared independence, but the Russian Red Army conquered a majority of Ukrainian territory and formed the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. In 1932, Joseph Stalin induced a famine in an attempt to reduce private land ownership and encourage collectivization, which killed close to 4 million Ukrainians. The Soviet leadership strengthened its control over Ukraine in 1939 after annexing western Ukraine under the guise of the Nazi-Soviet Pact. The Nazis killed over 5 million Ukrainians, and Stalin deported hundreds of thousands more to Siberia. In January of 1990, nearly 500,000 Ukrainians organized themselves into a 700-kilometer-long human chain, uniting several cities in a key step towards restoring Ukrainian statehood. Ukraine gained independence in 1991, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union through the Belovezh Agreement, and the United States established diplomatic relations with a free and democratic Ukraine. Ukraine's first president, Leonid Kravchuk, oversaw the country's transition from Soviet rule during his 3 years in power. His successor, Leonid Kuchma, and his administration allowed corruption to grow and tightened controls on Ukrainian media, culminating in the cassette scandal of 2000. Scandals of the early 2000s and corruption in the 2004 presidential elections, wherein initial results were rigged in favor of Kuchma's preferred replacement, former Prime Minister Viktor Yanukovych, led to the Orange Revolution of 2004. U.S. policy toward Ukraine emphasizes supporting Ukraine's free market economy, improving Ukraine's defensive capabilities, and strengthening democratic institutions as Ukraine faces threats from internal corruption and external aggression from Russia. When Yanukovych was named Prime Minister for a second term in 2006, he began to orient Ukraine towards Russia and away from Western Europe. Yanukovych was elected president in 2010. In late 2013, when Russian President Vladimir Putin threatened to paralyze the Ukrainian economy if Ukraine signed a free trade agreement with the European Union, the Euromaidan protests erupted. President Yanukovych's security forces killed nearly 80 protesters in Kiev, as tens of thousands of Ukrainians engaged in public demonstrations to protest the reversal of plans to sign the EU agreement. Tensions escalated into a revolution. Yanukovych fled to Russia, and the opposition took control of the government. The Russian government then capitalized on Ukraine's chaotic state, annexed Crimea through military occupation, and invaded eastern Ukraine with paramilitary forces operating under the cover of conventional military forces. Ukraine remains a dangerous flashpoint and the primary focus of President Vladimir Putin's goal of establishing Novorossiya, turning the Black Sea into a Russian lake and restoring his country to national greatness. The low-level war in Ukraine could escalate as Russia masses more troops near Ukraine's borders while continuing a campaign of political subversion and economic coercion. We welcome Prime Minister Honcharuk to discuss the U.S. Ukraine relationship, the Russian threat to security, and priorities to reform and strengthen governance in Ukraine.
Prime Minister Oleksiy Honcharuk, great to have you here as the first in-person guest on Battlegrounds. Welcome to the Hoover Institution and welcome to Stanford University.
Thank you very much, General. It's a great honor and pleasure to speak to you in this perfect place.
Well, we have a lot to talk about, right?
Yeah.
And I thought maybe we could begin, because I'm a historian, talking about the history of how we got to today. And of course, Ukraine has been under duress, right, since its independence in 1991. And I thought maybe you could explain to our viewers what that experience has been like, the struggle for democracy, the efforts to reform and counter corruption, and especially the efforts to resist this pernicious form of Russian aggression. So can you just explain to our viewers the history of Ukraine from independence in 91 to today?
Ukraine has, and the Ukrainian nation has very deep history, like hundreds, more thousands years. And the newest history of Ukraine, we count from the collapse of Soviet Union. Last 13 years, 30 years ago, Ukrainian nation got a chance to build the state, independent state. So I would describe these 13 years like a period between three revolutions. We had three revolutions in Ukraine. First revolution was when Soviet Union was collapsed. It was a fight for independence. Against Soviet, so maybe you know this story, and I shouldn't spend a lot of time on it, but the general idea was to create an independent state, and it was a dream for a lot of people in Ukraine for like a dozen years before. And it was very important, and that's why Ukraine played key role in that story about collapse. Then it was complicated 90s, and it was a period when oligarchs appeared in Ukraine because of unfair and sometimes illegal privatization process and so on and so forth. It was a complicated time for us. We didn't have strong institutions, but we did have strong democratic traditions. And that's why we still have like fair elections. And in 2004, when Orange Revolution happened, it was a pushback from our nation to the strongman guys.
Right. And the manipulation of the election.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was a fight for democracy. It was a fight for democracy because people understood that without this fight, it's impossible to save it. and we shouldn't take it granted. Yeah. And then after Orange Revolution, it was a period of some cultural and national even renaissance. Maybe it was economic growth period. It was good before the financial crisis.
Right.
Then financial crisis happened, and Ukrainian.
So this is Orange Revolution 2004, financial crisis 2008, 2009.
Yeah, it was very good 4 years. And that period of time, I believe, Ukrainian nation finally understood and find themselves as a European and pro-Western and a part of Western world for sure. Not only in democracy, but on an identity level, European country, really a European country. Because geographically, Ukraine is for sure a European country because the geographical center of Europe is located in the Ukraine's territory, so it's doubtless. But on a level of identity, it was a question for a lot of people. And at that period of time, Ukrainians, total majority of Ukrainians decided that, okay, our main direction of our nation it's towards Europe, towards European Union and strategic alliance with United States, Canada, and so we are part of Western world. And then President Yanukovych won the elections. He was supported one more time, as you absolutely correctly mentioned in your book, by Russian influence, because we used to have, and we still have, unfortunately, a huge influence of Russian medias and Russian agents, informational networks and sources of information in Ukraine. And when Yanukovych won, for me personally, it was absolutely clearly understandable that these guys will not go themselves.
Yeah.
And when Yanukovych decided not to sign the agreement with European Union, it was absolutely clear that the moment is critical, it's crucial, and people started protesting. And Yanukovych used the violence against people, and that's how a revolution started. And all of you could see all these events, all these terrible pictures when people were killed. More than 100 peaceful protesters was just killed on the street. And it was a critical moment. Yanukovych escaped to Russia, moved to Russia, one more time with the support of Russian special services, I believe. And it was the Revolution of Dignity was the revolution for European choice, for values. And we have reforms in almost all the spheres of governmental and social style. So if you look into the history of Ukraine, there's a history, it's a successful history, I would say, because we are still a democracy. And we have the only country in the region we have positive democratic trend. So we become more and more and more democratic. And if you will compare this trend with our neighbors, even on our western borders, even Hungary, even Poland, the trend is absolutely opposite. Right. So Ukraine now, despite the general negative to democratic trend, keep going to the democracy, and it's an example how to fight for democracy and not to take it into granted.
Yeah. It is really, I think, a frontier between democracy and authoritarianism, and of course,
Sure.
Russia didn't give up after the revolution, and in fact, I think what Vladimir Putin has demonstrated is his determination to ensure Ukraine doesn't move further to the west and towards Europe, and also to ensure that Russia can exert dominant influence over Ukraine in pursuit of this Novo-Russia idea, I think, right? Putin, I think, what he really wants to do is restore Russia to national greatness in large measure at the expense of Ukraine. and to weaken Europe broadly, right? So of course, you had a personal perspective on this, right? From the Orange Revolution, and then of course, a decade after that, you have the invasion of Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. Can you tell us a little about your personal experience in that period of time, and then we can talk maybe about the duress that Ukraine has been under since the invasion in 2014.
Before the Revolution of Dignity, I used to be a lawyer. I used to be a managing partner of a big law firm in Kyiv. We had a lot of very fancy and well-known even in Europe clients. So it was a successful business, and I had never participated elections before the Revolution of Dignity, because I lived in a world where democracy is a norma. Yeah. It's something like an air. Yeah, it just exists. And Yanukovych and his band, his crowd showed me that I can lose this freedom and I can lose this democracy, and that's why I become so active. I participated Orange Revolution from the day one till the last day, and I have been in Donetsk 2 weeks before invasion. I have been to Crimea 3 or 4 weeks before invasion. So we knew that we'll have these problems there, and we were trying to build some unofficial network to resist, and we failed with it. So I do have my personal experience about it. We were scared for sure, of course, but during the Revolution of Dignity we had this slogan, this motto, that there is no sense to be scared, there is no sense to fear, and the freedom is our religion. And two of these mottos, from my point of view, perfectly describe our motivation, that if you will be scared, you will lose freedom, and you will be, it's like you have a shame and you have a war, like Churchill told. So I know this from my personal experience. And after the Revolution of Dignity, I was invited into the government, and it was my war against the corruption. And of course, we were trying to help our people and our volunteers on the front line. And that's the perfect description how nation, not state, nation can fight for the freedom, even against 10 times stronger, 10 times more capable enemy. In this conceptual war, and I believe it's not a war between Russia and Ukraine, for sure, it's not. It's a war against democracy. And the main task in this war, in this conceptual war, is to destroy trust and share fear.
Yeah.
It's very simple tools, yeah? And Russia is perfect in both of this stuff. It's like world champion, maybe, in doing this. And I know this on my personal experience, how they share the fakes, misinformation, disinformation, and how they try to create chaos and uncertainty around you to make you scared, to make you disorganized, and so on and so forth. It's like a perfect tactics.
Yeah. You started talking about this earlier as well. Could you maybe explain, how do you see this, what some people have called Russian New Generation warfare, right? So you have the invasion of Ukraine in 2014 that includes unconventional forces, Russian unconventional forces, under the cover of a big conventional force capability.
Yeah.
But this is only one piece of it, right? You're alluding to this what I describe it and think about as a campaign of disruption, right? Disrupt trust, right? Break apart societies, create divisions within them or widen divisions that already exist, and then disinformation, and then denial. You know, what my friend Mark Sedwell is called implausible deniability, right? Even when the Russians shoot down a civilian airliner and it's clear to everybody that that's what happened. Oh, that wasn't us. We didn't do that.
They deny,
So how do you understand Russian new generation warfare? Because this is important for Ukraine. This is important for any country that is an object of Russian subversion, and the United States as well, where Russian new generation warfare is very active.
Of course. I actually have seen, like myself, these events around the Capitol last year.
Yeah, the January 6th assault on the
yeah, so, and it was, it reminded me the effects in Ukraine, because Russia works hard, not only in Ukraine, in Europe and in the United States here, to divide the society, to create, to play all this division and to use the tensions, emotions, and all the people, and to provoke them to be aggressive and to fight each other inside. So,
well, like in the U.S., right? They're very active on issues of race.
Yeah.
It's about 80% of Russian disinformation is to divide us on issues of race.
Absolutely.
Then it's immigration, gun control, anything that we're divided on. But in Ukraine,
they
right,
use everything. They use even COVID situation. They use. Look into the like activity of RT, Russia Today.
Yeah.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
They promote anti-vaccination. It's like, and how we what's our answer? What's our answer? We still have an account of Russian television of RT, Russia Today, on YouTube.
Right.
And YouTube is like United States corporation. What does it mean?
Right.
And
well,
the office of Google, official office of Google, regional office, where? In Moscow.
Yeah.
And they have problems exactly before the elections in Russia. And still they have office in Moscow. How it's possible to explain it if you understand that it's a war? It's impossible to understand it.
Right. And you know, we are really not competing in this area. I'd love to get your advice on this. How did you, when you were Prime Minister, how did you approach this information warfare? What were your priorities? You know, I was traveling in Turkey just a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah.
And I was looking for English news. The only English news station was RT. There was no CNN, there was no Fox, there was no MSNBC, there was no BBC.
Yeah.
And so clearly they bought their way into some of these markets to sow propaganda within our own societies, but even really globally.
Because they don't have an economic like reasons or economic goals behind it. They don't have. They just spend like oil money to make sure that their reality like act in a different part of the world and create their influence. Before we start in discussing the means and tools and capabilities, I would like to tell a couple of words about the goals.
Yeah.
Why?
Right.
Why it happened? I believe that it's complicated, of course, question, but to simplify the answer, Russia had found themselves as a separate civilization. And the core idea of this civilization is to protect the world from the evil.
Yeah.
And they think it's not a joke. It's almost a Bible-style battle. And in this Bible-style battle, the Russian on the side of everything's good, and the Western world showed as a representative of evil, because
and the Muslim world as well, right? The others, and this is the co-option of the Russian church. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely.
As well? Yeah.
And that it's absolutely clear that on a conceptual level, they build a concept in which the Kremlin and Russian nation, great Russian nation, fight for against evil. And this evil is trying to destroy their civilization, to attack them, to diminish their influence, and to undermine their core values. It's like skryepy, yeah? They call this skryepy, to make sure that Russia will not have a future. Because they appeal to the argument that we, as Russian world, we have a future only if our people, if our children will keep our values and keep our like skryepy protected. And based on this idea, and to explain that their civilization is not only the Russian Federation, they use this term like Russian world. Russian world is like built on the concept that all Slavic and Orthodox nations is like a part of their world, and because of the conspiracy theories of some Western empires, starting from like Austro-Hungarian, some place 100 years ago, and like till these days, Europe and United States, everyone is trying to destroy this Russian world. And the key role of Ukraine in this concept, because Ukraine is a Slavic nation, and the majority of our people is like Orthodox Christian. So on an identity level, it's very similar. And but Russia is an autocracy, and the Moscow is the center of this very like authoritarian Russian world. And Ukraine already choose the absolutely different direction. We are already a democracy. And this is the biggest problem for Russia, because how to explain their people that these people, Ukrainians, it's almost the same as like they Slavic, they are Orthodox Christian, but they can live in a free society. How to explain this to their people? Right. That's why the concept of successful democracy in Ukraine is absolutely critical for
threat to Russia.
Absolutely,
and
on
a
a
threat
conceptual
to their agenda.
on a conceptual level, and it's not because of money, it's not because of territories, and it's because it's on a conceptual level. It absolutely destroy and undermine the general idea of this Russian world, because it's impossible, it's incomplete world without Ukraine. And that's why they're trying to undermine Ukraine, and in all levels, to create chaos, to create uncertainty in Ukraine, to show that democracy is a failed concept. And it's impossible to implement it as a concept. It's a concept. It's not like bad or good. It's like failed concept. And the Western world, when Western world is trying to share these democratic values in the world, it's not sincere. It's not sincere. It's just a play. It's just a game. And the Western world is trying to undermine other civilizations by sharing democracy. This is very interesting to understand and very important to understand, because one more time, there is no any economic reason to build Nord Stream the second, for example.
Right.
It's a tool. It's a weapon.
This is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline for our viewers that is just about to be completed,
Yeah.
that the Biden administration green-lighted, which I didn't understand, and will create greater economic and dependency of Europe on Russia.
It's a hook.
And it's a cash machine, right, for Putin to use to accelerate this campaign of disinformation and disruption and denial. So can we move to maybe energy security then, and look at the way that Russia uses economic coercion based on creating dependence on Russian natural gas. It's affecting Europe already with the gas shortages. Of course, the big
artificial gas shortages.
Artificial gas shortages.
It's very important to
Putin
understand.
has telegraphed that. He's basically said, listen, the reason you're experiencing a gas shortage is because of the supply constraint that they're imposing to highlight the need to complete Nord Stream 2, which will then increase their coercive power over Ukraine.
And he's doing this like a lecture
Right.
If you will look into the picture in a Russian television, in RT, for example, or internet, it's a lecture.
Right.
He is playing with Western politics, politician, like a teacher, from a position of like person who knows everything and who is trying to explain to like Ursula von der Leyen that, okay, I will explain you some simple stuff on the fingers. Yeah. So speaking about energy security, it's impossible to build the energy security in Europe without Ukraine, physically. Because you absolutely like perfectly mentioned that Ukraine is like front line between Russia and Europe, but at the same time, Ukraine is the biggest European country, by territory. It's the biggest European country with a huge deposits of like mineral resources and so on and so forth, with one of the biggest electricity network in Europe. So with a powerful nuclear plants and so on and so forth. It's a big infrastructural country. And it's absolutely impossible in the long run, or even in a middle-term perspective, it's impossible to build the energy security without Ukraine. And now Putin created the artificial shortage in Ukraine and in Europe to show that, guys, you are hostages. You are hostages. And you have a choice. I can give you money, but you will play with me. Or I will create a problems to you, and you will be you will not be re-elected. Right. What's important? When they speak to you, they speak to like the guy who will be in an office in a couple of years, and they think that they are forever. You are only the I don't know, the puppet, the tool, the small piece of this Western civilization, right. And they can act in a long-term and middle-term perspective. Right. They can corrupt you, they can make you scared, and so on and so forth. And they are playing with you in all the spheres, in the sanctional politics, in the informational sphere, in the energy sphere, like that. Because you are elected. Right. You are elected. And I will speak to you only because you are in office.
The temporary occupant of whatever. And Putin's there till 2036 maybe.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah,
and if you will not work with me, I will undermine your influence through my tools. I will criticize you, I will finance your opponents, I will destroy your reputation, and so on and so forth. And you, anyway, will not be re-elected, and I will work with you with your more flexible next partners, so successors. So it's a style, you know. And it's absolutely not enough to analyze one sphere without other spheres. I believe that we need to find, it's absolutely necessary to find the conceptual, the multi-layeral answer to this threat, because it's like way of thinking. It's not, it's not to reach some concrete economic goal. It's not to protect some concrete economic interest. It's not to protect even some principles. It's a global war, global play, global game against democracy as a concept, because democracy doesn't work. And if democracy works, Kremlin is in the threat.
Right. And so really it is really it's a crisis of confidence they want to create, right? A lack of confidence in democratic processes and institutions and principles. And so can you tell me about, maybe tell our viewers more about your time as Prime Minister, what your agenda was to strengthen Ukrainian confidence, right? And because I think there is a defensive aspect of this, right? Against dependence on Russian gas, right? We should defend against that by diversifying energy sources, for example. But there's also like almost an offensive way, right, or a way to strengthen ourselves, to focus on our own institutions. You know, there's been a long effort to reform in Ukraine. One of Russia's first talking points is always there's so much corruption, and they try to really go after Ukraine's reputation to again diminish confidence in democracy. How do you see the reform effort over time? What was your agenda? What more remains to be done to strengthen Ukraine while the country's still under duress?
First of all, I think that the reputation of Ukraine is much worse because of this propaganda than it's in the real life. I know tons of stories when people came to Ukraine and was shocked. It's like, wow, we expected the much worse circumstances in there. So it's one of the goals of Kremlin's goals to destroy the reputation in Ukraine and to destroy trust between the countries, between partners, and between people inside the societies, and to divide, just to divide. It's still a lot of work should be done to transform our institutions, to build their capabilities, capacities. But I would say that Ukraine now and Ukraine 10 years ago, it's two absolutely different countries. I was invited into the presidential team and into government to make quick reforms. I remember one interesting meeting with on our early days in office with Benjamin Netanyahu. And he, as a very experienced politician, told us exactly guys, you have 6 months.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely...
This is the Prime Minister of Israel. Was visiting Ukraine.
Yeah. He was visiting Ukraine, and as one of the maybe most experienced politician with a worldwide name and so on and so forth, he is very well known in the world, and he told us directly, guys, you have 6 months to do some reforms. Then you will have more complicated circumstances, and now it's a good time. And that was our religion. That was our belief that we should do everything as quick as possible. We launched the land reform. So our idea was to build 3 markets: land market, labor market, civilized, liberalized labor market, and financial market. Because without cheap resources, financial resources, it's impossible to achieve economic growth.
Economic growth, yeah.
And that was our plan, that was our focus. And we absolutely immediately sent to the parliament the draft of the bill about land reform.
Right.
And it was
because once you have land reform, then you can leverage land to borrow money, and that money can then generate business, and so this has been a successful model.
Absolutely, but it's not the only. It's about culture behind it. If you are an owner of the land plot,
right,
you rely and you behave like an owner.
Yeah.
And you understand that, in the 2 years, in the 5 years, nobody will take you this land from you, and you can invest and you can choose the long-term and middle-term business models.
Right.
When you are just land this
a tenant.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You're playing very short, and if you play in very short, the money is very expensive, everything very expensive. So it's absolutely different business logic behind it. So this reform was very important not only for economic growth, but for some cultural changes, to change the role model, the change the way how our business think. To create some additionally to make broader the owners part of the society, So that was absolutely critical stuff. Of course, our priority was to fight corruption. We were the first government in the history of our country without the corruption on top level. And even our enemies recognize that. So it's impossible to tell that, okay, he is corrupted too. Yeah. And it was a very important example to the West that it's possible to have a clear and honest prime minister in Ukraine. So it's possible. It's bad or good, like somebody can like it or dislike it, but it's possible. The democracy is on a level when the prime minister and ministers could be clean people. And that's why one of our priorities was to fight corruption as soon as possible. We understood that we don't have a lot of time, because if we will fight against almost each other, everyone on like many directions, you will have a lot of time. And we have a lot of examples, of successful examples for this short period of time. For example, we closed almost all, but like 99%, something like that, illegal gambling, I don't know, locations, points. Because it was illegal in Ukraine, gambling, it was illegal. We didn't have the normal legislation to regulate it. And I expected that Parliament will decide something about this. But when they fail our bill, our draft, I understood that it's impossible to find consensus and to find solution in the Parliament because of lobbying and so on and so forth. And we should just cut this problem. And after that, we can speak with the stakeholders. Because when stakeholders is trying to influence your members of Parliament, corrupting them, it's much more complicated.
We call them lobbyists here in the United States.
I believe that it's not the same. Lobbying is when you have some rules how to influence, and you show how you influence, and you report how you influence. And much worse the situation when you don't have rules, and you don't show, and you play, manipulate, and so on and so forth. It's much worse. It's impossible to exclude this game from from this political life, but it's possible to regulate it, I believe. The same situation with the illegal gas distribution stations, illegal because they undermined the normal competition in the market. So it was very important to show to the players in this market that a fair competition and you should pay taxes, you should play honestly, and so on and so forth, and you will be successful. The big privatization. We launched the big privatization last. We sent more than something like 1,000. I don't remember the concrete number, but something like 1,000 state enterprises to be privatized, and it's the biggest number than it was sent before for all the years of our independence. So we launched a lot of reforms in the education sphere, in the healthcare sphere, so in the military sphere we had a perfect, I believe, Ministry of Defense.
I'd like to ask you just a little bit more about the military as well. And the degree to which you're happy with the reforms in the military. When I was the commander of Fort Benning, Georgia, and it was great to see so many young, energetic, dedicated Ukrainian officers come through Fort Benning. These were combat veterans, right? Who had been, and our viewers should know, there's an ongoing war in eastern Ukraine.
Yeah.
And they went back to Ukraine, I think, very motivated. And some of them were disappointed, though, I think, with the existing command structures and felt as if they couldn't make the kind of changes they wanted to. So, I mean, there's more to be done, obviously, always in reform efforts.
For sure.
How do you feel about the strengthening of Ukraine's ability to defend itself now, as Russia, just even today, is massing more troops on the borders?
I think that progress in this sphere is significant. We have much stronger and much more capable forces, military forces, than 5-7 years ago. The progress is absolutely obvious. And a lot of very important, not reforms, but changes, transformations have been done already. Like, for example, we divided the ministry from general staff, general staff. Right. So it's very important to
for civil control of the military and
absolutely,
oversight. Right?
Absolutely, because ministry should create a policy, not to organize and to execute the army. So, and it's only one example. A lot of protocols and standards were implemented, so the progress is big. We still have a problem, of course, with all this, and we still have a shortage of our finances because war is always big expenses. Always.
And logistics systems are so important.
Absolutely. And what's important to understand, before the Revolution of Dignity, under Yanukovych, Russia controlled the military sphere in Ukraine.
Right.
Lebedev, Solomatin, these guys were from
This is how they annexed Crimea, right? They already had control of these bases.
Absolutely. They controlled these bases. Right. They undermined and destroyed the capabilities, and make sure that they know everything. And actually, what's important to understand, that Russia's goal wasn't only the Crimea and Donbass region. It wasn't. They were trying to Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Dnieper, now Odessa. So their goal was, at that period of time, to take at least half of territory of Ukraine. And the fact that our society, nation, and then our military forces stopped Russia on the borders shows, and it speaks for itself. So, and now we have a significant progress, as I already mentioned, but we still have a lot of problems, and we should do something with the threats from the sky and from the sea, because it's expensive to build these
integrated air defense systems and short-ship missile capabilities.
Absolutely.
Can I just want to because we only have a little bit of time left, and there's so much to cover, but of course, Russia is massing on the borders of Ukraine now. They've reinforced their units in Crimea. It seems to be a direct threat. What do you think Putin's trying to achieve? Does it have something to do with the water supply to Crimea, as some people have said, or is his ambition greater? Or is it just more coercive in general to try to turn the Black Sea into a Russian lake and intimidate Romania and Bulgaria and other countries? What do you think's happening now? What is the danger to Ukraine and to security in Europe generally?
I would say the Putin, if Putin see the open door, he will enter the open door. Right. He will use all opportunities we will give him. So he will go so far, we allow him to go. And it's very important to understand, he's trying to check, and he is trying to feel how far he can go with all these games. With these build-ups, he's trying to create a pressure on our economy because it's very complicated to attract investments, for example, to Ukraine. Right. If investors read in the news,
the geostrategic risk.
Absolutely,
right.
And it makes our resources more expensive and so on and so forth. And I think that it's absolutely impossible to win this war in this battleground for democracy without the total involvement of all our Western resources. Because one more time, what's important to understand, it's not a war against Ukraine. It's not a war. Putin may have some tactical goals, but it's not the case. It's not what this war about. This war is to undermine democracy is an idea, because Ukraine is a significant, very important country for Kazakhstan, for Kyrgyzstan, and at the same time for Bulgaria because of Slavic and Christian, Orthodox Christian religion, and for even Macedonia. It's like Ukraine is the biggest country in Europe, And it's in the most complicated situation because of a huge part of our population speak in Russia, and it makes easier for Russia to influence through propaganda. We have the huge border with Russia, and it creates a lot of threats of like direct military invasion and so on and so forth. And without, and it's not a war for Ukraine. It's not a war for Ukraine. Putin don't need Ukraine as like as a territory.
Drag the Western world down, right? Because I think Putin thinks his theory of victory is to be the last man standing, so to speak. Right?
Absolutely. And this his words that, okay, guys, in case of nuclear war, all of you will die and we will go to heaven. It's not an empty words, I believe. Of course he didn't want to die, of course, but it shows us this concept of this Bible-style battle, as I already described. They think, they believe, I believe that first of all they are trying to protect their corrupted interest, of course.
Yeah, right.
But
the power
behind this,
that keeps Putin in power.
Yeah. But behind this, it's a bigger idea. And if even Putin on his early years didn't believe this. Now I'm sure he believed, because when you repeat the same narrative like tons of time, you started to believe it yourself.
This is this notion of him as the defender of the culture, and this is why he appears, shirtless on horseback and so forth. We only have a couple minutes left.
And fighting a bear.
Right. There's only a few minutes left, but I really want to end with your thoughts and your advice on, how the United States, the EU, other countries can work with Ukraine, right, to strengthen Ukraine, a country that's clearly, as we've discussed, under economic duress, military duress, informational duress from this threat. And I'm struck by our discussion about opportunities for private sector cooperation as well, and in the economic sphere, in energy security, and rare earths. But what can the U.S. government, other governments do? But also, where are the private sector opportunities to help strengthen Ukraine and to help win this fight between democracy and authoritarianism?
Of course, it's very important to invest, and to have some property and some even private interest from Western world there. So the investment is maybe the number one you need in Ukraine now. And it's very important to show by the example that, okay, guys, it's safe, we will protect this investment and you can rely on us. So the government of United States, for example, can encourage the investors to work in Ukraine. For example, the offices of American global companies, from Google. Moscow is not the best place. Kyiv is a much better place to locate in the region. And it's only one example, The second, symbolic support. I mean that, guys, NATO plan, how to become a member. It's not about membership now. Okay, you should show us the road. We should go. But the political decision that Ukraine is a Western part of the world. It's like part of our.
Same thing with the path to EU membership.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. It could be some conditions. It could be some even very hard to achieve conditions.
Right.
But it should be a political decision. We are ready to fight for this, because if not, this is a opposite signal, and Russia will use it to undermine the trust between Ukraine and between the Western countries. And for sure, I believe that United Nations and we need a reform of this mechanism, how to work with the conflicts in which involve the or permanent members of Security Council of United Nations. And for sure, we should rethink the approach in sanctions policy And I have a concept of like cascades or conditional sanctions.
To impose costs on Russia beyond those that they
Because-
consider it when they
Because now
aggressive
existing model creates the situation when the time is working against the victim, and the time now works against the Ukraine, because in like 10, 20, 30 years, Crimea accident, Crimea annexation will become a history. Will become a history, and the political pressure on
that happen. Absolutely.
and every year it becomes more complicated task to remain sanctions, and it will be politically more and more difficult. And Putin, and what signal it gives to Putin? Okay, I can wait. I can wait, and I will undermine your democracy, and I will influence your domestic policy to make sure that someday I will have an opportunity to dismiss them, and when I will dismiss them, I will show you that your struggle will fail. And in that period of time, at that moment, the Crimean annexation will be history, and everything's okay, and deal done. And it opens very dangerous. It creates a very dangerous intentions for China, for example, and for Russia for sure, and for such aggressive countries. So I believe that it's absolutely critical to rethink and to change the sanctions approach, to make them more predictable, and to make sure that the model creates a situation when the time works against the aggressor. And it's what's the most important, I believe, to understand that Ukraine now is a main battleground for democracy in the world, and it's not a war. It's not a local conflict. It's not a war between Ukraine and Russia. There is no any like conflict between our nations. It's a conflict of concepts. Ukraine chose the democracy as a model, and we will fight for freedom, and we will not take it into granted. And it's much. And as soon as you guys here in the western part of the world understand that it's very hot, not cold war, because the temperature of this cold war in our region is very high, as soon as you understand it, the sooner the better.
Well, Prime Minister Honcharuk, I can't thank you enough on behalf of the Hoover Institution.
I'm
so glad you're here with us, because we're going to continue to learn more from you and learn more from your leadership and what we can do to help strengthen Ukraine on this frontier between authoritarianism and democracy. Thanks for joining us.
Battlegrounds is a production of the Hoover Institution, where we advance ideas that define a free society. For more information about our work, to hear more of our podcasts, or view our video content, please visit hoover.org.